This is an update about my personal experience observing individuals engaging in intimate activities. The French gentleman has been staying in my apartment for the past few days. I initially gave him a couple of days at most. However, 2 days eventually became 3 days, and the third day was literally yesterday, which is when the situation finally came to an end. This was never part of my plan, especially after the events of my previous post. But the French gentleman showed up at my apartment following yet another explosive argument with his ex-girlfriend and asked me if I was willing to make him my temporary roommate for a day or two, because being roommates with his ex-girlfriend was not exactly, how do you say, peaceful. The French gentleman had enough social awareness to at least acknowledge how inappropriate it was to expect anything from me, considering the fact that A, we hardly knew each other, and B, based on our recent history, I knew enough about the roller coaster he called a relationship to not want any part of it. However, apparently all of the people he used to call friends were supposedly friends with his ex-girlfriend first, which made him feel like he had zero support and nowhere to go, so he decided to make his problem our problem. I was reluctant to get involved, but he seemed incredibly vulnerable, and I was too weak to tell a heartbroken man to leave, so I made him promise me that he would be gone in 2 days. As you know, it was more than 2 days. It was 3 long days of feeling like I had made a mistake. Let me explain. Day 1 asterisk. The French gentleman not only decided to cook for me towards the end of the day, but he also seemed to enjoy listening to me complain about work. It actually would have been a surprisingly wholesome first day if the French gentleman didn't feel the need to joke about getting excited from hearing me use big English words to describe my responsibilities at work. I awkwardly called it a night as soon as it became clear to me that one of us did indeed have a noticeable reaction that was very hard to miss. Day 2 asterisk. The French gentleman convinced me to join him for an early morning run. Along the way, he approached different girls on the street and thickened his already thick French accent before saying, "If I can prove I have your name on my backside, can I please get your number?" If the girls said yes, which most of them did, the French gentleman would reveal the words, "your name," tattooed on his buttock. It was kind of cringe, not going to lie, but he would get a laugh out of the girls, as well as their numbers. One of the girls happened to be someone I had a small crush on back in high school. She was too focused on the French gentleman to notice me struggling to catch my breath in the background, let alone recognize or remember me, which obliterated what little self-confidence I had left by the time we were done running. Day 3 asterisk. Also known as yesterday. The French gentleman was supposed to leave, but instead of saying goodbye, he asked for an extension. An extension with an incentive. The French gentleman said if I allowed him to stay for just one more day, he could arrange to have an intimate encounter in front of me with someone who was not his ex-girlfriend, if, of course, that was still a fantasy I wanted to explore. I stated that it was too soon after what had happened last time, which prompted him to pull out his phone and show me borderline adult photos on social media of an attractive woman who was apparently willing to engage in intimate activities while being watched. According to the French gentleman, she was like him, an exhibitionist. One of many exhibitionists the French gentleman claimed to know. I automatically stopped thinking rationally after seeing what the woman looked like and instructed the French gentleman to pull whatever strings he needed to make that happen. The French gentleman confirmed that the woman confirmed that she was free to engage in intimate activities starting at 7 o'clock in the evening. Fast forward to 7 o'clock in the evening. The French gentleman made dinner. I made sure the apartment was spotless. Both of us looked our best, but it was only the two of us. It remained just the two of us long enough for me to begin wondering if the French gentleman really arranged to have an intimate encounter with someone, or if he was just willing to say anything to remain my unofficial roommate for another day. What made me doubt his intentions even more was the fact that he was constantly feeding me. Literally. He would put a spoonful of whatever food in my mouth every time he saw an opportunity. I never disliked what I tasted. He is an excellent cook. However, based on how day 1 ended, it was unclear if there was, something a little unusual going on. I gradually gave up when it was almost 9 o'clock and no woman had arrived. Whenever I asked the French gentleman if she was still coming, He would end up calling or messaging her before telling me that she was not responding. I decided to finish my dinner and go to bed. A few minutes after 10 o'clock, the French gentleman knocked on my door and informed me that the woman actually showed up. Against my better judgment, I got out of bed without changing out of my pajamas and left my room to meet the woman. I was more in the mood for sleep than to watch people engage in intimate activities, but the woman was very apologetic about being late and seemed eager to get started. Her looks and enthusiasm overshadowed the long list of random reasons she had for ghosting the French gentleman and showing up hours late, so I thought, you know what, let us just go with it. The woman took the lead when everyone agreed to proceed. She made me understand that it was very unusual for something like this to happen in such an impromptu way, but she owed the French gentleman a favor, so she was willing to go with the flow and skip straight to intimacy. Speaking of intimacy, there was, yet again, no intimacy. During foreplay, specifically during oral stimulation, the French gentleman struggled to maintain an erection. It happens to the best of us, so I didn't judge, but it was painful to watch, especially when it became obvious that he was not going to be able to maintain it no matter what the poor woman did. The French gentleman repeatedly said, "I am so sorry," and subtly implied that his failure to maintain an erection was because he was not used to having voyeuristic intimacy with someone who was not his ex-girlfriend. When the woman heard the words ex-girlfriend, she stopped providing oral stimulation and suggested that perhaps it was not the worst idea to accept defeat and call it a night. Both the French gentleman with the flaccid situation and the naked woman whose efforts were not enough looked at me for the final decision. I took my hand out of my pants and gave them a lackluster thumbs up. The woman wasted no time getting dressed. As she rushed to put on her clothes, she praised me for being open-minded enough to allow random people to engage in intimate activities under my roof, even though the intimacy never happened. However, she also encouraged me to visit sex-positive clubs where exhibitionism and voyeurism were allowed, as it would be much safer and most likely more successful than allowing strangers into my personal space, only for them to disappoint me, or worse, leave unpleasant marks on my belongings. I never had a boyfriend or owned a gaming console, so I just assumed she was referring to an unpleasant experience she had in the past. There was no space for me to comment or ask questions or even react because her closing statement was that she had studying to do for an upcoming exam. So she was going to use the time she would have spent engaging in intimate activities with a charming French gentleman in front of a person wearing pajamas as a sign that she should have just stuck to studying to begin with. Before saying goodbye, she advised the French gentleman to explore healthier ways to move on from his ex and reminded me about what she said regarding the sex club. The French gentleman left my apartment this morning. Our bro hug felt final. I am not sure if I am going to see him again. I hope not. He is not a bad guy, but my life makes more sense without him in it, no offense to the French. To summarize, the French gentleman convinced me to let him stay at my place for a few days after his ex-girlfriend and current roommate was making his life unpleasant. His presence in my apartment came with a series of unfortunate events involving unexpectedly intimate moments between us, witnessing one of my high school crushes fall for the French gentleman's flirtation, and another attempt at observing people engage in intimate activities, only for it to end with the French gentleman being unable to maintain an erection.